Hey guys, it's Andy here, and welcome back to another episode of Deck Doctor. This is a Locus God commander deck submitted by one Sting Fulton, and I'm just going to talk about his deck here. I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm not going to do a whole version of the deck, so I'm not going to do my whole version of the deck. I feel like Commander is a bit more personal in terms of deck building, depending on how you want to build the deck. Personal preferences is a huge part of it. So instead of tweaking it the way that I want it, relaying the deck back to you, repeating a lot of the same cards over again because there's so many cards to go back over. I've just got a list of cards that may or may not be valuable to him, depending on what he wants to do with the deck. Things that could improve the deck, depending on which direction that he wants to go with it. We're going to talk about the guide here, and hopefully you guys enjoy the video. The Locus God is for 6 for a blue and a red. It's a 4/4 legendary creature god with flying, and then whenever you draw a card, you create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. It's also got pay 4 to a blue and a red to loot, so you draw a card and then discard a card. And then whenever Locus God dies, you return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. It's a great way to get around the command attacks that would normally happen, because it's going straight back to your hand and you can just play it for its normal cost. Locus God's an insanely good commander, something that I've played in paper before. Great card. The synergy that you can get out of just drawing cards and building an army full of creatures, insanely cool. To talk about the deck, I've got it broken down into categories based on what the cards slot into. So to talk about the deck, I've got it broken up into different categories. Draw card is obviously something that's really important for the deck. So we're going to have wheel effects and draw card as two different categories. Then we're going to have the just instants and sorcery, just spells of the deck. Next to that, we're going to have the control spells of the deck. Then we're going to have utility pieces or value cards. Then the pingers. So let's start off with the wheel category. So when we're talking about a wheel effect, it's usually discarding your hand and then drawing a full grip of cards, like another 7 cards. Talking about that fairly loosely here because we're using other effects that do something very similar in terms of value, be it putting all our hand onto the bottom and drawing a heap of cards, or a number of cards going to the graveyard and us drawing that many cards. There's a couple of different ways you can do it, but we're just going to talk about it here. So to start off, we've got Arjun, the Shifted Flame, which is for 6. It's a 5/5 legendary creature Sphinx Wizard with flying. And then whenever you cast a spell, you put the cards in your hand on the bottom of your library in any order, and then draw that many cards. Same thing happens with Mind Moil, which is a 5-cost enchantment, so it just does the bottom part ability. Whenever you play a spell, you put the cards in your hand on the bottom, draw that many cards. Winds of Change, for 1 red. At sorcery speed, each player shuffles his or her hand into their library, then draws a new hand with as many cards as he or she had before. The Fairies Puzzle Box is another absolute all-star in a deck like this. For 4, it's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards from his or her hand onto the bottom of their library in any order, and then draws that many cards. These 4 cards here are an absolute testament to the absurd amount of draw card that we can get in this deck, getting the full value out of the Locus God's ability to generate creatures whenever we draw cards. Memory Jar is for 5. It's an artifact with tap, sacrifice Memory Jar. Each player sets aside his or her hand face down, and then draws 7 cards. And at the end of turn, each player discards his or her hand and returns to his or her hand each card he had set aside this way. Tap, sack, draw 7, insanely good value. At a 5 cost, it might be a little bit expensive, but the effect is still pretty solid. More on the spell sides of stuff and getting closer to the wheel effects is the Windfall for 3. At sorcery speed, each player discards his or her hand and draws cards equal to the greatest number a player discarded this way. Shattered Perception for 3. At sorcery speed, you discard all cards in your hand and then draw that many cards. Flashback for 6. So we can play this again from our graveyard. The key part of this card is that it's a wheel effect that only targets us. So we're the only ones discarding all the cards and drawing all the cards. So we're the only ones getting value out of it. Where a lot of these other effects will be each player, it's good to have that selection. Tolarian Winds at a 2 cost, also at instant speed, you discard your hand and then draw that many cards. Reforge the Soul for 5. At sorcery speed, each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. Or you can play this card for its miracle cost if it's the first card you've drawn this turn for 1 and a red. Jace's Activist for 3. It's a 2/2 Vedalken Wizard with pay 1 blue, tap, each player discards his or her hand and then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. It's basically a recurable Windfall effect. Flux for 3. At sorcery speed, each player chooses and discards any number of cards, then draw that many cards, and we get to draw a card. The best part about this is it's good card selection. Flux is a really good pick for the deck, which brings us to the next category, which is basic draw card. Touching on some enchantments, some really cool creatures, and some more utility side of stuff with the artifacts that are in here. So first off, we're going to start with Thought Reflection, which is for 7. It's an enchantment with, if you would draw a card, draw 2 cards instead. It's a bit costly. If you're looking to play a bit more competitive, you might consider swapping it out for something else that's maybe a little cheaper or a similar effect, but it's an awesome card nonetheless. Archanis the Opputant, which is for 6. It's a 3/4 legendary creature wizard with tap, draw 3 cards, and then it's got pay 4 to return it to its owner's hand. Consecrated Sphinx, which is for 6. It's a 4/6 Sphinx with flying, and whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. Typically, a game of Commander is 4 players, so by the time this gets back to your turn, you should have potentially drawn 6 or more cards. We've got some X draw spells in the form of Expansion to Explosion and Mind Spring. So Mind Spring is just X, draw X with X and 2 blue at sorcery speed. Expansion to Explosion is a little bit different. So a duo card, so you can do one or the other. So you can either play Expansion for 2 hybrid. At instant speed, you copy target instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less and copy it. Choose new targets for the copy. Explosion is X and 4. At instant speed, you deal X damage, any target, and target player draws X cards. It's a great include from what is in the standard set at the moment. Solemn Simulacrum. At a 4 cost, it's a 2/2 artifact creature golem. This adds to a little bit to our draw card, as well as a little bit to the ramp, which we pretty much need in this deck. We need a little bit of ramp because Locus God is so expensive. So when Solemn Simulacrum enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. When Solemn Simulacrum dies, you may draw a card. Adding to the damage and also the draw card, we have Master the Way, which is for 5. At sorcery speed, you draw a card, deals damage to target creature or player equal to the number of cards in your hand. Another card that also synergizes well with Thought Reflection is Mystic Study, which is for 3. It's an enchantment that sits on the battlefield, and whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Effectively puts a tax on anything that they want to play. That amount of value is hard to get away from, and it's really, really good for us. Another great enchantment is the copy of Fervid Visions, which is for 3. At the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. If that player is your opponent and has 4 or more cards in hand, Fevered Visions deals 2 damage to him or her. I can't think of any time that I've played it and dealt anything less than 10 damage with Fervid Visions. It's pretty crazy. Frantic Search for 3. At instant speed, you draw 2 cards, then choose and discard 2 cards. Untap up to 3 lands. It's just playing a card for free. I love the cards that untap the lands after you've played them. There's a few different cards from Magic's history that do it. This is no exception to being one of the good ones. To finish off the draw card here, we have 3 really cool artifacts. The first one is Howling Mine, which is for 2. It's an artifact that has, at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. We're also running Skull Clamp, an equipment for 1. It's got equipped creature gets +1, -1. And whenever a equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards. So we pay 1 to put this onto one of our Locusts. Our Locust dies because it's only got 1 toughness. And then we draw 2 cards because the token still goes to the graveyard. So as long as you've got the mana, you can just constantly draw cards, get tokens, draw cards, get tokens, always netting more tokens and 2 cards for every 1 mana that you're doing it. It's insane in this deck. Absolutely insane. And to finish off the draw card, we have Sensei's Divining Top, which is for 1. It's an artifact with pay 1, look at the top 3 cards of your library and put them back in any order. And it's got tap, draw a card, and then put Sensei's Divining Top on top of its owner's library. So here's the useful blue spells in the deck with the exception of Double Cast. So we've got a couple of different ways to just take an extra turn. We've got Temporal Manipulation, which is for 5. At sorcery speed, you just take an extra turn after this one. Nexus of Fate for 7. At instant speed, you take an extra turn after this one. But if it would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, you reveal it and then shuffle it into its owner's library instead. Washout for 4. At sorcery speed, you return all permanents of the color of your choice to their owner's hand. Depending on what you're playing against, if you've got multiple decks that are running the same colors, this could be an absolute bomb. Mana Short for 3. At instant speed, you tap all lands target player controls and empty his or her mana pool, essentially silencing our opponent and stopping them from being able to play anything. Cyclonic Rift for 2. At instant speed, you return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, or you can pay it for 7, replacing all instances of target with each. So it becomes a board wipe that affects everyone except you. High Tide for 1 blue. Until in a turn, all islands produce an additional blue mana when they tap for mana. Insanely good ramp in the deck. Being 2 colors, it's not as effective as it would be in like a monocolor deck, but it's still a really good card. Double Cast and Twin Cast are kind of similar effects. Double Cast is for 2 red. At sorcery speed, the next time you would play an instant or sorcery spell, you copy that spell and you may choose new targets for the copy. And Twin Cast is for 2 blue. At instant speed, copy target instant or sorcery spell and you may choose new targets for the copy. Drain Power for 2 blue. At sorcery speed, target player draws all mana from all lands he or she controls, and you put all mana from that player's mana pool into yours. Similar to High Tide, just adding to the ramp, or if you played High Tide already, and you target a player that's running blue, being able to do this would generate even more mana. Just a little bit of synergy in the deck there. Reminisce, which is for 3. At sorcery speed, target player shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library. Mystic Retrieval for 4. At sorcery speed, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Flashback for 3, so for 2 and a red, you can play it from your graveyard. Which brings us to the next category, which is Counter Magic. Sting's not running too much counter magic in the deck here, but the stuff that he is running is quite effective. We've got Mindbreak Trap, which is for 4 at instant speed. It's a trap card, so if an opponent casts 3 or more spells this turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay Mindbreak Trap's mana cost, and you exile any number of target spells. Counterflux for 3, it's at instant speed. Counterflux can't be countered by spells or abilities. Counter target spell you don't control. Overload for 4. And then it goes from being target spell to each, working very similar to the Mindbreak Trap. Ionize for 3 at instant speed, counter target spell, and Ionize deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. Unwind for 3 at instant speed, you counter target non-creature spell, and then untap up to 3 lands. Arcane Denial, which is for 2 at instant speed, you counter target spell, and then that spell's caster may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of next turn's upkeep, and you draw a card at the beginning of next turn's upkeep. Mana Drain for 2 blue. At instant speed, you counter target spell, and at the beginning of your next main phase, you add X to your mana pool, where X is the casting cost of that spell. Adding to the ramp in the counter magic, just another really good card. Counter spell for 2, bit of a catch-all. At instant speed, counter target spell, and Swerve for 2. At instant speed, you change the target of target spell with a single target, effectively countering it. That's why it's in this category, because whatever they're targeting, it's not targeting that anymore. But we get the added bonus of being able to turn around back at them if we want to, or targeting anybody else around the table. It's just great. Getting through the cards a bit now. Now we're moving to the next category, which is the utility. There's a few really good pieces here. So to start it off, we've got Mind Over Matter, which is for 6. It's an enchantment with choose and discard a card to tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land. Being able to target our own stuff to get more use out of it, or being able to target our opponent's stuff to like tap down their creatures so they can't block. So Mind Over Matter, really, really good card. Turning our hand into value, it's just great. Empress Galena, which is for 5. It's a 1/3 legend with pay 2 blue, tap, gain control of target legend or legendary permanent. Being able to gain control of our opponent's commanders can be really shattering for a lot of decks. Another card that utilizes the cards that we have in our hand is Dream Halls, which is a 5-cost enchantment. Instead of paying the casting cost for a spell of any color, its caster may choose and discard a card that shares at least 1 color with that spell, and then if X is the casting cost, X is 0. The amount of times that we can just draw into more cards, giving us more cards to discard to this and play more cards for free, insanely cool. Yes, it does open it up for our opponents as well, but it's still an insanely cool and an insanely fun card. I absolutely love it in this deck. Stranglehold for 4. It's an enchantment that sits on the battlefield, and your opponents can't search libraries, and if an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. This can absolutely shut down some decks. A lot of black decks will run tutors to try and get to their combo pieces, or even if it's just like a combo deck, being able to shut that down. A really cool utility piece. Joyra of the Jitu for 3. It's a 2/2 legendary creature human wizard with pay 2, remove a non-land card in your hand from the game. You put 4 time counters on it, and then if it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. With the suspend, at the beginning of the upkeep, you remove a time counter from it, and then when it has no time counters on it, you play it for free, and if it's a creature, it gains haste. I see it played a lot more in decks that are running like Big Bomb Eldrazi and stuff like that, but in the right situation, this can be a really effective card. Library of Leng, which is an artifact for 1. Skip your discard phase, and then whenever a spell or effect forces you to discard a card, you may instead discard that card to the top of your library. Us skipping our discard phase basically just means we have no limited hand size. At a 1 cost with the effects on this card, it's crazy. Isochron Scepter for 2. So it's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and it's got imprint, so when Iconic Scepter comes into play, you may remove an instant card with mana cost 2 or less in your hand from the game, and then it's got pay 2 and tap it. You may copy the imprinted instant card and play the copy without paying its mana cost. Being able to throw any of the 2 mana counter spells on this, being able to high tide every turn, insanely cool card. I absolutely love Isochron Scepter. A little bit of protection in the form of Lightning Greaves, which is equipment for 2, and then it's equipped 0, so for nothing you can put it onto the creature, and that equipped creature has haste and can't be the target of spells or abilities. Panharmonicon for 4. It's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and then if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. This card synergizes fairly specifically with a very few cards in the deck. This card synergizes very specifically with the next category. And to finish off these, he's also running Laboratory Mechanic, which is for 3, 2, and a blue. It's a 2/2 human wizard with if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. So it's not so much utility. This card just doesn't really fit into any of the other like proper categories, but it gives us another kind of win con in the deck. If we can find a way to potentially draw out our deck, or if we're in a grindy matchup and then we can play this out and then just win off of it, it's just great to have that alternate win con in there. Before I touch on the next category, I'm actually going to leave Panharmonicon on here. Before I touch on the next category, I'm just going to remind everybody about Panharmonicon. I'll actually leave it up here. Before I touch on the next category, I'm actually going to remind everybody about Panharmonicon, and I'll actually leave it up here when we go into it. So the next category is Pingers. Going into the pingers category, you can see there's not very many of them, but these are the absolute bombs of the deck. We'll just touch over, again, with the synergy with Panharmonicon, doubling triggers whenever an artifact or creature enters the battlefield. It's super relevant when it comes to the next couple of cards I'm going to talk about, which is Perforos, God of the Forge, and Impact Tremors. Now, Perforos is a 4-cost, 6/5 legendary enchantment creature god with Indestructible, and as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a creature. We don't care about any of that. It's just the end bits that we care about, which is whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Perforos deals 2 damage to each opponent. Insane value in this deck. So with the amount of draw card in the deck and the amount of Locus that we can actually generate, this can just absolutely destroy our opponent's life total. On the bottom of it, it's also got an Anthem effect, which is pay 3, 2, and a red. Creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. That's a repeatable Anthem effect that we can use to buff our army of 1/1 flying haste creatures and swing in for even more damage. Impact Tremors is kind of Perforos' little brother in this instance. It's a 2-cost enchantment, so it's for 1 and a red, but whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. So the synergy with Panharmonicon, every time a creature comes in, it's doubling those triggers. So Perforos will be dealing 4 damage every time a creature comes in, and Impact Tremors will be dealing 2. If we have all 3 of these cards out, our opponents are getting pinged for 6 damage every time we get 1 Locust. Blasting Station, another really good card in the deck. For 3, it's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and it's got tap, sacrifice a creature. Blasting Station deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Whenever a creature comes into play, you may untap Blasting Station. With the amount of draw card in the deck and the amount of creatures that we're generating, we're going to be able to tap and untap this quite regularly. It gives us a little bit of targeted removal in the deck, being able to ping their creatures for damage, but the synergy really comes into it when we've also got Outpost Siege, which is for 4. It's an enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, you choose Khans or Dragons. So if you choose Khans, at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of your library, and until end of turn, you may play that card. And if you choose Dragons, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to target creature or player. I love the utility on this, being able to pick one or the other, so we either get card advantage or we can get a when they die trigger. If we've got the Blasting Station out, that means we get essentially a double trigger on the dealing damage, but we can split it if we want to. And the last of the pingers is the Psychosis Crawler, which is for 5. It's a star artifact horror. Psychosis Crawler's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand, and then whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. So wrapping up the pingers category, that brings us to the Mana Rocks. For a commander that's so expensive, I'm actually quite surprised that there isn't more Mana Rocks in the deck here by Sting. So he does have some fairly effective stuff and a little bit more on the utility side. Just a quick note, I'm not going to touch over the land base except to mention Reliquary Tower, because it's probably the only really noteworthy inclusion in the land base, really relevant for what this deck is trying to do. But to save on time, I'm just not going to touch on it. So talking about the rocks here, we've got Gilded Lotus. At a 5 cost, it's an artifact with tap add 3 of any 1 color mana to your mana pool. Ashnod's Altar for 3. It's an artifact that's got sacrifice a creature to add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Using our Locusts as a resource to generate more mana to throw into like X spells. Ashnod's Altars are an absolute include in this deck. It's crazily good. Adding to the ramp and the mana fixing is Command Sphere, which is for 3. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. So that'll be red or blue in this case. And it also has sacrifice it to draw a card. Thought Vessel for 2. You have no maximum hand size. Again, this is something that the deck uses to full effect. And it's also got tap to add 1 colorless. Sol Ring, Commander Staple for 1. It's got tap add 2. Crazily good. You're not playing Commander without it. And Izzet Signet, which is for 2, sits on the battlefield, and it's got pay 1, tap to add Izzet colors, so blue and red. So with the exception of the land base, that is everything that was in Sting Fulton's Commander deck. So with the exception of the land base, that was everything that was in Sting Fulton's Locus God Commander deck. I will post a link to his version of the deck in the description, so if you want to see that, you can see it there. So the next thing I want to touch on is the cards that I feel could go into the deck. Depending on the direction you want to go is however many cards would like slot in. But for anyone who isn't Sting that's watching this, if you want to build a Locus God deck, this could give you a lot of ideas. So let's get into it. I gotta say that I was a little surprised when I looked at the original list that the Smash Brothers weren't in it. They are Niv Mizzet the Firemind and Niv Mizzet Perun. So Niv Mizzet is for 6, the 4/4 legendary creature dragon wizard with flying, and whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and then it's got tap to draw a card. And then Niv Mizzet Perun is again for 6, but this is 3 blue and 3 red. He's a 5/5 legendary creature dragon wizard. With this spell can't be countered, it has flying, and whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target. And then whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. Especially in Commander, Niv Mizzet Perun is an absolute all-star. It's going to be getting a lot of value off our opponents playing cards. Every time we draw a card, it's pinging for damage. And with the amount of draw card that's in the deck, Perun or Firemind, either one of them would be really, really useful. The other 2 cards that I have here is Tamio the Moon Sage and Jace the Mind Sculptor. So Tamiyo is for 5, 4 loyalty Planeswalker with its +1 ability is tap target permanent. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Its -2 ability, which is the one we care about, is draw a card for each tapped creature target player controls. So if we've just gone sideways with our army of locusts, this -2 means we're going to draw a shitload of cards, and then we're going to get a shitload more locusts. That's the logic behind me wanting to put it in the deck at all. The -2 ability is insanely good for what this deck does. Which brings me to Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is for 4, 2 and 2 blue. It's a 3 loyalty Planeswalker with its +2 being look at the top card of target player's library. You may put that card on the bottom of that player's library. Its 0 ability is you draw 3 cards and then put 2 from your hand back on top in any order. It's a Brainstorm trigger. So for no loyalty counters, you're drawing 3 cards, you're getting 3 locusts. Insanely good for what the deck's doing. Its -1 ability returns target creature to its owner's hand, which in Commander can be really relevant. And its -12 is exile all cards from target player's library. Then that player shuffles his or her hand into his or her library. It's not likely that you're going to get to the -12 here, but Jace is definitely worth keeping, even if it's just to do the 0 ability again and again until he's dead. Which brings me on to the next couple of cards, which are tutors. So we can see here I've got Mystical Tutor and Merchant Scroll. Mystical Tutor is for 1 blue. At instant speed, you search your library for an instant or sorcery card and reveal that card. You shuffle your library and then put that card on top of it. And Merchant Scroll is for 2 at sorcery speed. You search your library for a blue instant card, reveal that card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. I felt like the deck was missing tutors, fairly specifically to try and make it a little bit more consistent, adding in Blue Sun Zenith, which is X and 3 blue. At instant speed, target player draws X cards and then you shuffle Blue Sun Zenith back in. It would be a really, really good include in the deck. As well as Pull from Tomorrow, which is X and 2 blue. At instant speed, draw X cards and then discard a card. Staying on the theme of draw card, here's some cards that I really think would improve, considering some of the cards that I'm putting in here, just being able to come off and win. So the first one is Wind Reader Sphinx, which is for 7. Yes, it's a bit pricey, but the effect is kind of worth it. It's a 3/7 with flying, and whenever a creature with flying attacks, you may draw a card. So whenever a locust goes sideways, we draw a card for each one, and then we double our locusts. Kindred Discovery for 5. It's an enchantment that sits on the battlefield, but when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. This comes in and we name Insect. When we get an insect, we draw a card. When we draw a card, we get an insect. It's just infinite draw. So you will need to be careful with this. If you're playing it, you do need a way to interact with it and stop it. Either getting rid of the Kindred Discovery or sacrificing the Locust God. But I felt like that 2-card kind of instant deck ourselves combo was too good to pass up, especially when you're running Lab Mechanic in the deck. Something else I found that does get you a shitload of card advantage, but is a hell of a lot safer, is Slate of Ancestry, which is for 4. It's an artifact that's got 4 tap, discard your hand, and then draw a card for each creature you control. Even if we're just trying to finish them off with Perforos or Impact Tremors or something, and we've got Locust God out, we just want to dump our hand and draw a shitload of cards. Something I thought would work really well, synergizing with a few different things. The next 2 cards work very similar, Bidon of Thrasser and Coastal Piracy. Both of them are 4 cost, 2 and 2 blue, and whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, you may draw a card. Both have that ability. It's just Bidon of Thrasser has 2 tap creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. And the last of this kind of draw card synergy here is the Distant Melody, which is for 4, 3 and a blue. It's at sorcery speed. You choose a creature type and draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. If you're going for the go wide strat, I thought it'd be a great include. In this next lot of 8 cards, we have a couple of really good Anthem effects. We have a card that can just outright win us the game, a few cards added to the pingers category, some insanely good ramp, and a great utility piece. So to start it off, we have Coat of Arms, which is a 5-cost artifact that sits on the battlefield, and it has each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least 1 creature type with it. So we can see how that would very quickly get out of hand, making our insects 5/5s, 10/10s, 20/20s. It could be insane and just outright win us the game. Going by that same logic and at a better rate is Shared Animosity, which is for 3. It's an enchantment that sits on the battlefield, and whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. Shared Animosity, definitely worth having in the deck. The next is the card I was talking about that can pretty much outright win us the game, and that is Breath of Fury. For 4, you enchant a creature you control, and when enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, you sacrifice it and attach Buried Fury to a creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures you control, and then after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So the way that this can just outright win the game is by synergizing with the few cards that I mentioned previously. In the Coastal Piracy, Bident of Thrasser, or the Windreader Sphinx. Having any one of these out, if we get damage through with our Locusts, creating more Locusts, getting more damage, drawing more cards, creating more Locusts. So you can see how this synergizing with any one of these can just outright win us the game. If we're going sideways all the time with our insects, our creatures are going to be tapped more often than not. So having Throne of the God Pharaoh in here, insanely good. Throne of the God Pharaoh is for 2. It's a legendary artifact. And at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. Just adding this huge amount of damage at a stupidly low rate. If you're adding in more of the Draw X stuff, Mana Echoes is definitely worth having a look at. So Mana Echoes is for 4. Whenever a creature comes into play, you may add 1 generic to your mana pool for each creature you control that shares a creature type with it. We can throw this crazy amount of ramp into Draw X spells or into damage spells. Stuff like Fireballs, Comet Storm, all that kind of thing. Also worth to include and synergizing with a few cards that are already in the original list is Goblin Bombardment, which is for 2. It's an enchantment with Sacrifice a Creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So this is essentially a 2-mana blasting station, kind of skipping out the middleman, not having to tap anything and untap it. We're just sacrificing Locus to get value out of them straight away. So Goblin Bombardment I thought would be a great include. So the next couple of cards synergize really well together. I actually ran both in my paper deck, but the next card specifically is a great pinger, and that is Chiron Negotiations, which is for 4, 2 and 2 red. It's an enchantment with tap and untap creature you control. Chiron Negotiation deals 1 damage to target player. And also Paradox Engine, which is for 5. It's a legendary artifact with whenever you cast a spell, you untap all non-land permanents you control. Being able to deal 10 to 40 damage with this isn't a ridiculous idea. With that, I'm almost at the end of the cards that I would like to include in the deck. I'm just going to touch on the last of it now, but I'm also going to talk about some cards that could be replaced with other cards, as well as a little bit more of a highlight on Paradox Engine and why I think it should be definitely included in the deck. So to finish off my include, started off with Time Reversal, which is for 5, 3 and 2 blue. At sorcery speed, each player shuffles his or her hand and graveyard into his or her library, then draws 7 cards, exile Time Reversal. Just a really great wheel effect for the deck. Forgotten Creation, which is for 4th. It's a 3/3 zombie horror with Skulk, so it can't be blocked except by creatures with greater power. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may discard all the cards in your hand, and if you do, you draw that many cards. The next 3 are the Whirlpool Brothers. It's the Whirlpool Drake, Whirlpool Warrior, and Whirlpool Rider, all of which, when they come into play, you shuffle your hand into your library, and then you draw that many cards. Whirl Rider's for 2 or 1/1. Whirlpool Warrior is for 3, a 2/2. And then Whirlpool Warrior also has pay 1 red to sacrifice it, and then each player does the same ability. And Whirlpool Drake at a 4 cost is a 2/2 flyer with the same effect not only on its ETB, but when it dies. The next couple of cards are Dramatic Reversal and Alhammarut's Archive. So to talk about these, I need Isochron Scepter and Thought Reflection. Archive is for 5. It's a legendary artifact. If you would gain life, instead you gain twice as much life instead. And then if you would draw a card, except for the first one you would draw in each of your draw steps, you draw 2 cards instead, which I see is something you can either add with the Thought Reflection that's already in the deck, or just straight up replace it, because this is at a better rate and you don't need 3 blue mana to get to it. So this could be something that's considerably cheaper that works almost as effectively. And Dramatic Reversal is for 2, 1 and a blue. At instant speed, you untap all non-land permanents you control, and the whole purpose of that is just to throw it under Isochron Scepter. When it's under Isochron Scepter, you can just go 2 tap to untap. So if we have Dramatic Reversal under Isochron Scepter, it turns all of our mana rocks into infinite. It turns our tap draw card into infinite. It turns our tap to deal damage into infinite. And if you add the tutors that I've already mentioned, it's another way to get to the card. So on a final point, one of the big reasons Paradox Engine is hated in the Commander format is its ability to do exactly what it does. Whenever you cast a spell, you untap all non-land permanents you control. The combo potential for this is insane. Tap, draw 3 cards, I play a spell, untap it, tap. Being able to tap your mana rocks multiple times in a turn, generating mana. Being able to, with Jace's Activist, being able to wheel multiple times in a turn. If we can roll into infinite or pseudo-infinite mana through either through Paradox Engine or through the infinite untapping from Dramatic Reversal and Iconic Scepter, throwing all the mana into Blue Sun Zenith. Niv Mizzet being able to tap multiple times through to Paradox Engine, ping our opponents for damage. I just reckon it's an absolute include for what the deck is. You might want to consider throwing in a few more mana rocks in the deck just to be able to make that a little bit more reliable. And the other card here is Inventor's Fair, which is at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 more artifacts, you gain 1 life. It's got tap, add generic, and it's also got 4 tap, sacrifice Inventor's Fair to search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library afterwards. I do this only if you control 3 or more artifacts. If you're running more mana rocks, this will work a lot better, but it's a great way to just search for the Paradox Engine and then go into the more combo side of stuff. So the last thing I want to talk about is my personal preference for cards that I would consider cutting to bring in some of the cards that I'd suggested. So the first one is Thought Reflection, obviously swapping for that Archive card that I mentioned earlier. Archanis, yes, it draws 3 cards. At a 6 cost, it is expensive. If you are going to be running something as costly as this, I'd probably like it to do a bit more than this does. And the Wind Reader Sphinx just ticks too many boxes for me. I'd like to swap it out for that. Empress Galena, although noteworthy and hilarious, I feel could be swapped out for probably better cards, maybe something a bit cheaper to lower the curve down a bit. Master the Way, Memory Jar, and Temporal Manipulation. The extra turn isn't something that we really need. Memory Jar's wheel effect is something I feel like I've pitched better wheel effects than what Memory Jar can offer. And Master the Way, at a 5 cost sorcery, I feel like probably any one of the enchantments that I'd mentioned could be a better slot in and a more powerful card to put in than this. Outpost Siege, I'd clean swap for Goblin Bombardment. Solemn Simulacrum, I'd probably take out and replace it just with a mana rock that's probably got something a bit more utility, a Mind Stone or something that can ramp you a little bit, but potentially draw you a card if you want it. At a 4 cost, something like Thran Dynamo, being able to tap for 3 mana, could be something that would potentially be better for what the deck's trying to do. I'd actually consider cutting High Tide. Yes, the ability at that rate is insanely cool, but not being mono blue, we're not utilizing it to its full potential. So High Tide, I feel like, isn't the best pick for the deck. I feel like there's better cards that could be helping us towards our end goal. Cards like Double Cast and Unwind, I feel like this is a little niche and be replaced with something a bit more powerful. And Double Cast, although useful, is just something that when it comes down to the crunch would be a card that I would take out as a personal preference to myself. Drawer of the Jitu, having the utility to be able to play cards cheaper over a number of turns. Yes, it's really useful, but being able to play something like Mana Echoes, as I mentioned, enchantments that can just ramp us absurdly, or playing into stuff that's going to give us more value. I just feel like there's better picks and stronger cards than what Jora has to offer. Reminisce, not a big fan of the card. Yes, it's a useful thing to be able to shuffle out of the graveyard back into our library, but it's not really helping us towards our end goal. Stranglehold, very situational. It could be swapped out for something like Shared Animosity, which is really helping us with our game plan. Panharmonicon, really niche. The small amount of synergy that is in the deck, I feel like could be swapped out for something that synergizes considerably better. But I feel like something like Paradox Engine or even Throne of the God Pharaoh would be something that would synergize a lot better in the deck. And especially if you're adding in some of the key pieces that I've recommended, being the Niv Mizzets or whatever, the Paradox Engine becomes even better in that regard. And the last card is Mindbreak Trap. Taking this out for something like Breath of Fury or Chiron Negotiations, just adding a better win con to the deck instead of trying to control what our opponents are doing. Again, hugely personal preference. This is just what I would consider cutting, or these are the first cards that I would consider cutting. But I will post in the description a link to my altered version of Sting's list, just so that you can see the direction that I'd take the deck. Hopefully people out there feel inspired and they want to build their own Locus God decks. It's an absolute bomb. I love Locus God as a commander. It's a great card, and this was a hell of a lot of fun. It was a hell of a lot of work, so I probably don't want to do too many commander decks for this Deck Doctor stuff, but Sting, let me know in the comments whether or not you liked it. Everybody else, let me know in the comments whether or not you liked it. If you've got a deck that you want me to do for the Deck Doctor series, just add it in the comments along with what you want done with the deck or what it's not doing, and I will add it to my ever-growing list of decks. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to see new videos as they were released. If you like what I do and you want to support the channel, you can throw me $1 on my Patreon at patreon.com/ZandersQuest. And I will see you guys in the next video. Keep questing, guys.